The highlight of this conversation is that we have Maria Bocanegra, president of People's Energy. And that is one of the largest utilities here in this area. And we are so thrilled to welcome her. Let's welcome her and have a conversation with her. Okay. Let's see if that one works.
On?
Yep,
Okay.
you're on. And I'm going to put on my glasses so I can. So, Angeles is all about promoting Latino, Latina success, and yet there are some elements that so bind us. We have some similar language. We have a very strong commitment to family. So even though we can't wait to hear about your career path, we want to know about your family and how, you got here.
Pues gracias, buenas tardes. Hopefully everyone's still awake after that lovely lunch. Maria Bocanegra, the first Latina president of a major Illinois utility company here for the state of Illinois. Yes.
Yes, let's hear that.
Yes, that's important. But just a little bit about myself. I always say when people ask that question, I can't talk about my career without talking about my family. I grew up with a single mother. They were married at one point, my mom and my dad, but I come from a family of migrant farm workers. So somos de Mexico. But my mother, when she was 17, she's the oldest of 14, and so she decided to settle in Aurora, Illinois. And I remember asking her when I was little, ¿por qué Aurora? Like, what? Like, do we have family here? And she just recalled working the fields in DeKalb. And back then, Aurora was an up-and-coming city. And so that's how we decided to make roots in Illinois. And slowly, all mi tíos y mi tías followed from Texas. And so first in my family to go to college in any generation, first to go to law school. Most of my career has been in public service. So I've been an appointee under various governors, Republican, Democrat, lawyer by trade, like I said, workers' comp background. So to be in this seat is quite the journey. Did some stints as an ALJ, presiding over workers' comp cases. And when Governor Pritzker defeated Governor Rauner in his reelection bid, they were moving folks around different agencies. And I get a call from another Latina up there, and she says, we've seen your resume. I'd like you to come over to the ICC. And I said, the what? I don't know what that is. But, the rest, as they say, is history. That was a very life-changing moment for me. But I'll stop there and see if...
Well, I like that, but I want to go back a little bit because you said the first of any in your family to go to college and then to go to law school. What motivated that? What motivated law school? What did you see that you would think in a family that doesn't even have college grads would motivate you to stay longer and go to law school? I want to hear about that.
Yeah, it's so, like I said, my mother was a migrant farm worker growing up as a kid until she was 18, and for some reason I always thought that being a lawyer was the best way I could help people, and I had envisioned a career as a labor and employment attorney. That's what I wanted to do. Hence, I kind of landed somewhat there with workers' comp, but that was the initial impetus for that, and I thought that was the best way I could help mi gente and give back to my community. And obviously life had other plans, but I graduated college, took some time off just to kind of grow a bit, and I'm so glad that I did. I took 3 years off, but I just knew that I didn't want to push paper for a long time. I was working at the U.S. Bankruptcy Court out in Denver, Colorado. Wow. And I just knew that I wanted to do more. I felt like I had more energy, and I knew then that it was time to go back. But I've always just wanted to make my family proud,
Wow. And look, that is such a common theme, right? All of us, because we have this closeness to family, we always want to make our family proud. We always want the kids to see the best in us. When we are the kids, we want our parents to finally get the reward that they have worked so hard in America for, which is kids that get an education. So I'm very touched by that. But you're a lawyer, and you were asked to join the ICC. That's the Illinois Commerce Commission, and you didn't know what it was. So please, I'm pretty certain that a lot of people don't know what that is. Tell us a little bit more about that and how that really was a pivotal point to getting you to People's Energy.
Yeah. So, for those of you that don't know, the Illinois Commerce Commission is a state agency with offices in the city and in Springfield. They are charged with regulating publicly traded utility companies. So that would include folks like ComEd, Peoples Gas, North Shore Gas, Nicor Gas, et cetera, as well as water utilities. And they also regulate a whole host of really random things like railroad crossings, towers and movers, and warehouse relocators. So, but the utility regulation is really the bread and butter of the business. And the reason for that is utilities are natural monopolies. And so in exchange for allowing them to be monopolies, they are highly regulated. So we don't spend a dollar without regulatory approval from the ICC.
Wow. And it's very technical too, right?
Very technical. And I don't have an engineering background. I'm a poli-sci major with a pre-law concentration. But it's everything from finance to economics to policy, engineering of all kinds. And so there's a lot of really, really good technical knowledge at the ICC.
Yeah. And it's just been a workhorse in Illinois because so much is driven by utilities here, and it is, it doesn't get to be a more highly regulated industry than maybe banking, but that's one I know about. And so there's a lot that goes into everything, the most minute issues, because a 1 cent change in compensation one way or another makes a huge amount of difference to the citizens who are using the utility. But before we get to before we get further along, let's talk a little bit about something that you did before People's Energy and why you did it. Yes, the ICC is very related to utilities, but you also took a break from Illinois.
I did.
Yeah,
I did.
and please share that.
So people often wonder like why I would voluntarily move to Cleveland, Ohio, but but there's a really good explanation for that. So, I mean, first of all, as an attorney and a former ALJ, and then sitting as a commissioner, you really are trained that ethics and transparency and following the rules are paramount. And so when you roll off the ICC, it's a very, very strict 2-year revolving door ban. You cannot obviously work for a regulated entity and even indirectly. And so everywhere I was kind of turning, my ethics officer would say things like, well, maybe, but that's unclear. And I just kept saying that's not good enough. Like, I want a clean slate. I never want anybody to say anything because at the end of the day, all you have is your integrity, quite frankly. And you can always get a job, right? And you can always go practice law, and you can always fall back on things like real estate or other things that you may pursue. But so I consciously made the decision I was going to leave the state, and so it was between becoming the chief legal officer and government relations officer for the Port of Cleveland, or I was going to go down to Florida and join Next Era Energy Company. And ultimately, I decided to do Cleveland. And so it was a completely different industry, so to speak, but I knew that it would stretch me a little bit, grow my network, and see what would happen. But the plan was always to come back. It was just sort of to rinse out, as they say, when you're leaving government service. And so the 2 years was up, and it so happened that it was time for me to start thinking about, all right, well, what's available here? What's happening? And I remember I got a call from a now colleague of mine at Peoples Gas, and they said, hey, not sure if you heard, but Torrance Hinton has just quit Peoples Gas and is going to First Energy in Ohio. And Torrance would like to know if you'd be interested in exploring, an executive leadership role And my now colleague said, I think I know the answer. You're trying to get back to Chicago. I said, yeah, I'm not sure. Like, that's not really what I envision. So they said, just put a pin in it, wait. There's no need to say yes. There's no need to say no. Just let it sit there. And I said, you're right. So I thought about it, and then I thought I would do what a lot of commissioners do, which is to go consult for utility companies. And so I called the colleague back, and I said, I've given it some thought, and I'd like to consult. Maybe if you could pass along Torrance's contact, I'll take a run at him. And they said, why don't you just become president of People's Gas? And I said, that's hilarious. Like, where's the application? And the rest is somewhat history again, as they say. One thing led to another, and they said, no, we're serious. Like, your name's actually come up. And if you are interested, you would need to demonstrate some interest and, put a resume together and all that. And before you knew it, we were down this path of, I was driving up to Milwaukee and interviewing with the executive leadership up there. And it's, I was telling Adela before this that I often say, I'm like, God, I feel like I'm lucky. But my husband's always like, no, hard work creates luck. And so, but yeah, that's how that conversation started.
I have to say that, you've seen me, some of you have seen me in this role a number of times. That is the most breathtaking rise to the presidency that I've ever heard.
Yeah.
It's really great.
Thank you.
And now we're here to talk about that, about you being and becoming the president of People's Energy. But to be honest with you, I'm not sure that we all know the scope of this company.
Sure.
And so maybe if you could share that before we talk about the mission and your own desire to leave an imprint.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, for those of you that may or may not know People's Gas outside of your gas bill, People's Gas operates in the third largest city in the United States. So we operate exclusively in the city of Chicago. We serve approximately 880,000 residential and C&I customers. We have approximately 1,400 employees comprised of, management and our labor men and women. We've been in business now 175 years. We're Chicago's first utility company. And so this year is our 175th year anniversary. Yeah. And so my portfolio really encompasses, so I'm a subsidiary president. We are owned by WEC Energy Group based out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and they own a variety of assets, everything from regulated gas and electric, bespoke assets. We invest in things like battery storage, data centers, rice units, natural gas plants, for folks that may not be familiar with that. But yeah.
Wow, that's a huge scope.
Yeah. So I'm responsible for the day-to-day operations of the business.
So you're overseeing engineers, everybody doing the actual transmission of gas.
For the delivery of transmission. So yeah, it's everybody from, operators, engineers, technical staff, our labor, like I said, our project managers, construction managers, the entire gamut that, needs to make an operations run.
That's huge. So you went from being the regulator of the changes in the industry to now running your own business.
Right. That's right.
That's very, very, very impressive. So as you now, you've been in the position, 8 months?
8 months, yeah.
What do you envision as the path that you will lead this company through? What are some of the most salient changes that you think you'll have an impact in making?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. I think that first I want to acknowledge that one thing that was important to me when I was deciding whether to accept the job was understanding where People's Gas was at that time. And I think a lot of you are familiar with some of the challenges that we have faced from a regulatory and a policy perspective. And so there's a lot there, even just to unpack. And so I think first and foremost, my number one goal is to accept a measure of accountability and get right with our regulatory bodies and to get right with our community. So that is clearly why I was brought in. I'm not an engineer, and I've never run a utility company, but I do know what needs to be done in order to be compliant and meet the expectations that we have. And so that's the number one thing, is we have to return to being better community stewards here in the city of Chicago, and with our people, with our employees, with our labor. And so that's number one. The second thing is obviously we have a massive infrastructure program that needs to get up and running. And so running a gas utility is the bread and butter of the business, and we have a lot to do. And right now we are hyper-focused on ramping that back up. The ICC paused the program for a number of years while it was investigated. The ICC issued its order earlier this year in February. And so since then, we've been working very, very diligently with our engineers, our finance team, to figure out how do we ramp up in a way that is compliant with the order and still maintains affordable, reliable, and equitable natural gas services.
So let's translate. Is this sounding? Let's translate that a minute. It's a 175-year-old company, so that means the infrastructure in some places might be old.
Very old.
Right.
Yes.
So that means that you've gotten permission to modernize it. But
Yes.
it's expensive. So in order to get better delivery of your gas, you need to spend a lot. And it's not a line, it's not a piece of wire, right, that goes through. You kind of have to dig into the streets.
Yeah.
So very disruptive.
It's very disruptive, and I think the other thing too is while that is a challenge, I always look at challenges as opportunities, and I think when we have started to look at this and ask ourselves, how do we roll this out, but in a better, more enhanced, more transparent way, I have asked our teams to really look at more than just the engineering, the procurement, the actual construction. It's really looking at, I told you the first part, how do we increase transparency? How do we make sure that our stakeholders are aware of what we're doing and we're answering their questions? Is it an opportunity to look at workforce development, bringing in more minority businesses, women-owned businesses? And how do we do our program in a way that's equitable and aligns with the city's own climate goals and other things? So there's a lot there beyond just the traditional engineering piece of that.
Yes, of course. And also, it's a moment in time when there are incredible technology breakthroughs. And, everybody talks about AI and you talk about what it's able to do. But some of the costs, sorry about that. Oh, God. How do I turn this off? Sorry about that. But the back office of AI is the huge consumption of utility services.
That's right.
And can you talk a little bit about that and how you're addressing that?
Yeah. I think, so like a lot of you, utilities, including People's Gas, we are starting to look at artificial intelligence and how do we leverage that for not just our day-to-day operations of gas infrastructure planning and deployment, but how do we participate in the AI revolution and in the data center and especially the quantum computing revolution that is clearly taking place here in our footprint. So a couple of things. Right now we are working with use cases and acceptable governance policies internal to the company. And so we've been fortunate enough to be given access to be able to do that. And so it's really looking at everything from, does that help us with our litigation? Can that be an O&M planning tool, a financial forecasting tool? Externally, though, with AI and data centers coming online, largely a lot of the discussion has centered around the power grid and the electric sector. And understandably so. They get a lot of the attention. They're the darlings of the moment, if you will. But with everything coming online, like solar and battery, you have these interconnection queues with long wait times. You have permitting issues. You have environmental steps that you have to overcome. But what I have started to publicly say to folks that will listen is that we're here. We have an infrastructure system. Yes, some of it needs to be replaced and upgraded, but we don't face the same permitting challenges. We don't have an interconnection queue. So why aren't we thinking of the gas delivery system in a more thoughtful way as complementing our electric system? So rather than trying to get rid of it, it should be repurposed.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the times we think of our natural gas delivery system as heating, hot water, stove cooking, and maybe some backup generation. But why can't it just power something?
Exactly.
Why can't it
be
act as flex fuel
Right.
On peak days when ComEd's grid is overloaded? Isn't it possible that it could offset costly electric investments that may otherwise increase customer bills on the electric side? Again, I'm not an engineer. I think that my ideas just, they're there, but I think that they merit a conversation. And so I think of that when I think of us celebrating 175 years in business. It's a testament to the resiliency, number one, of going and being able to evolve with the times. And this is just the next natural question we need to be asking ourselves and are starting to ask ourselves.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question because it's so cost efficient. Yeah. So why isn't that an alternative, and how do you make it work for some of these really extreme needs that AI creates?
That's right.
Not just around the country, but around the world.
That's right.
And it's only going to increase because everybody wants to use it. No, well, that's great insight. Angeles is made up of about 700 members, and by and large, these are individuals that want to invest in technology, in startups. Many have achieved tremendously in their careers, but I know that they are all very interested in you and your background and your advice. And I think that because of our tech focus, we probably don't talk a lot about other sectors like utility. Also, we have a lot of financial service bank,
Sure.
what do you call it, sponsors. So we talk a lot about finance and technology, but not about utilities. And can you talk a little bit about the opportunities there? Obviously, you're a brazen example of the kind of opportunity there, but on a wider basis, as we interact with younger people that are looking to expand their professional vision.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, the one thing I will say is that if you haven't noticed, we've talked about AI, we've talked about data centers. Really, the energy sector is the backbone of all of that. It's the backbone of a lot of the tech or technologies that we're talking about. You can't really do anything without power or gas or water, for some of these processes. I think what I would say is that, the energy sector and the interest in the energy sector is growing. We're not going anywhere. There's a lot of what I would say sort of adjacent industries that sort of complement and support the energy sector. And so I think for folks looking to invest and looking for sort of that next level, I think on the gas side, there's a lot of technologies around things like hydrogen, renewable natural gas, and increasingly just even from a policy perspective, there's, at least in Illinois and in a lot of other jurisdictions actually too, there's just an increasing expectation that a utility company engage with its community. Like I was saying at the beginning, you're seeing a lot more stakeholder engagement, companies and groups, and the need to facilitate a lot of that. We are now expected and understandably to think about things like affordability, equity, and how we plan our systems. And so I would say that there is a ton of opportunity. You don't have to be an engineer, clearly, to be in the energy space. And I think for the foreseeable future, there is a lot of growing to be done.
Well, that's great. And we don't really have a lot of time left. And I do want to maybe accommodate one or two questions very, very quickly. Does anybody have a question for Maria? Yes. Yes.
I'm not college president, but come from the regulatory side. So just in terms of regulatory as CEO, and congratulations on your leadership
Thank you.
rise as well. Anything that you could share without compromising on how the system of governance around energy, in terms of a country and as we invest in the dollar and our markets, as having both a regulator and now a CEO, do you have any wisdom or advice of where we should be in 5, 10, 30 years in terms of how we regulate energy? How we involve those public interests? Are you worried that we're behind in some of the development of these larger projects?
So the question.
Yes, I can repeat the question. So the question is, from a governance perspective, what do I think is happening in terms of the next, 10, 20 years, and how might utilities either be regulated, sitting on both sides? I think that kind of captures, What I would say is, so there's two things to consider. So utilities at the distribution level, like People's Gas, we are regulated by states. So state policy varies from state to state. And so, when I think about your question of like, what is the future? Well, it really largely is driven by what is the state policy and what is the political environment. And so we don't really have a federal national energy policy, so to speak. I mean, we have a federal regulating body that regulates interstate transmission and other things like that in RTOs, but it's largely driven by state level policy and governance. What I can say is just utilities as monopolies behave like monopolies. That's just a reality. Utilities will invest where there is a healthy regulatory environment, and they will put their dollars where they know that they will have a stable and steady return on that investment for every dollar that is invested. Now, that ROE is set by each state commission where I used to work. It is set by a state agency. And so there can be stability there, right, if you're looking to invest in things like utility companies. But I think for the foreseeable future, that model will remain as is. It's just largely a state-by-state dependent thing. I think for here, I do believe that we are sort of returning more to a all-of-the-above approach, especially with the energy demands on the grid. There's really no time to pick winners and losers.
Thank you very much. I think I'm being told that we don't have much time. I want to thank you for coming
Gracias.
to present to us. We were started, David and I started by celebrating Latino success at the C-suite. But when Maria was appointed president, and I'm glad she explained how it happened, it was so quick. We didn't know. We were, when I saw it, I said, how are we not going to celebrate? This is a huge accomplishment. I'm not sure that you should consider this the kind of reception we would like to have for you, but consider this a group of very committed members that want to celebrate and support you.
Gracias. Thank you very much. I will accept this as that welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you. Very nice.